Hi, here we have, we're going to be reading out of Selected Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. I'm going to be finishing up the part 2 of the general prologue, coming up to the Knight's Tale. This is Dover Thrift Edition, published in 2017. Alright, so we're starting now with the parson. There was a good man of religion, too, a country parson poor, I warrant you. But rich he was in holy thought and work. He was a learned man also, a clerk, who Christ's own gospel truly sought to preach. Devoutly his parishioners would he teach. Benign he was and wondrous diligent, patient in adverse times and well content. As he was oftentimes proven, always blithe, he was right loath to curse to get a tithe. But rather would he give, in case of doubt, unto those poor parishioners about part of his income, even of his goods, even with little colored all his moods. Wide was his parish, houses far asunder, but never did he fail for rain or thunder, in sickness or in sin or any state, to visit to the farthest, small and great, going afoot in his hand a stave. This fine example to his flock he gave, that first he wrought and afterwards he taught, out of the gospel, then that text he caught, and this figure he added thereunto, that if gold rust, what shall poor iron do? For if the priest be foul, in whom we trust, what wonder if a layman yield to lust? And shame it is, if priests take thought for keep, a shitty shepherd, shepherding clean sheep, well ought to priest example good to give, by his own cleanness, how his flock should live. He never let his benefice for hire, leaving his flock to flounder in the mire, and ran to London, up to old St. Paul's, to get himself a chantry there for souls, nor in some brotherhood did he withhold, but dwelt at home and kept so well the fold, that never wolf could make his plans miscarry. He was a shepherd, and not mercenary. And holy though he was, and virtuous, to sinners he was not impiteous, nor haughty in his speech, nor too divine, but in all teaching prudent and benign, to lead folk into heaven, but by stress of good example was his busyness. But if some sinful one proved obstinate, be who it might, of high or low estate, him he reproved, and sharply as I know, there is nowhere a better priest, I trow. He had no thirst for pomp or reverence, nor made himself of special spiced conscience, but Christ's own lore and his apostles 12 he taught, but first he followed it himself. Now the plowman. With him there was a plowman, was his brother, that many a load of dung and many another had scattered for a good true toiler he, living in peace and perfect charity. He loved God most, and that with his whole heart, at all times, though he played or plied his art, and next his neighbor, even as himself, he'd thresh and dig, with never thought of pelf. For Christ's own sake, for every poor wight, all without pay, if it lay in his might. He paid his taxes fully, fairly well, both by his own toil and by stuff he'd sell. In a tabard he rode upon a mare. There were also a reeve and miller there. So in a tabard he rode upon a mare. A tabard is a short, loose-fitting, sleeveless, or short-sleeved coat or cape. And there was also a reeve and miller there. So a reeve is a steward or bailiff of an estate. And pelf means money or riches. So here, let me go back. There were also a reeve and miller there, a summoner, a mancipal, and pardoner, and these beside myself made all there were. So now the miller. The miller was a stout churl, be it known, hearty and big of brawn and big of bone, which was well proved, for when he went to lamb at wrestling, he never failed he of the ram. He was a chunky fellow, broad of build. He'd heave a door from hinges if he willed, or break it through by running with his head. His beard, as any sow or fox, was red, and broad it was as if it were a spade. Upon the coping of his nose he had a wart, and thereon stood a tuft of hairs, red as the bristles in an old sow's ears. His nostrils they were black and very wide. A sword and buckler bore he by his side. His mouth was like a furnace door for size. He was a jester and could poetize, but mostly of all sin and ribaldries. He could steal corn and full thrice charge his fees, and yet he had a thumb of gold, begad. A white cloak and blue hood he wore, this lad. A bagpipe he could blow well, be it known, and with that same he brought us out of town. The Manciple. There was a manciple from an inn of court, to whom all buyers might quite well resort, to learn the art of buying food and drink, for whether he paid cash or not, I think, that he so knew the markets when to buy. He never found himself left high and dry. Now it is not of God of full fair grace, that such a vulgar man has wit to pace. The wisdom of a crowd of learned men, of masters had he more than 3 times 10, who were in law expert and curious, whereof there were a dozen in that house, fit to be stewards of both rent and land, of any lord in England who would stand upon his own and live in manner good, in honor debtless, save his head were wood, or live as frugally as he might desire. These men were able to have helped a shire, in any case that ever might befall, and yet this manciple outguessed them all. The Reeve. The Reeve, he was a slender, choleric man, who shaved his beard as close as razor can. His hair was cut round, even with his ears. His top was tonsured like a pulpiteer's. Long were his legs, and they were very lean, and like a staff with no calf to be seen. Well could he manage granary and bin, no auditor could ever on him win. He could foretell by drought and by the rain the yielding of his seed and of his grain, his lord's sheep and his oxen and his dairy, his swine and horses and all his stores. His poultry were wholly in the steward's managing, and by agreement he'd made reckoning. Since his young lord was age of 20 years, yet no man ever found him in arrears. There was no agent, hind, or herd who'd cheat, but he knew well his cunning and deceit. They were afraid of him, as of the death. His cottage was a good one on a heath, by green trees, shaded with this dwelling place. Much better than his lord could he purchase. Right rich he was in his own private right, seeing he'd pleased his lord by day or night, by giving him or lending of his goods, and so got thanked, but yet got coats and hoods. In youth he'd learned a good trade, and had been a carpenter as fine as could be seen. The steward sat a horse that well could trot, and was all dapple gray, and was named Scott. A long surcoat of blue did he parade, and at his side he bore a rusty blade. Of Norfolk was his reeve, of whom I tell, from near a town that men called Badeswell. Bundled he was like friar from chin to croup, and ever he rode hindmost of our troop. Now we have the summoner. A summoner was with us in that place, who had a fiery red, cherubic face. For eczema he had, his eyes were narrow, as hot he was, and liquorous as a sparrow. With black and scabby brows and scanty beard, he had a face that little children feared. There was no mercury, sulphur, a litharge, no borax, ceruse, tartar could discharge, nor ointment that could cleanse enough or bite to free him of his boils and pimples white, nor of the bosses resting on his cheeks. Well loved he garlic, onion, eye, and leeks, and drinking of strong wine as red as blood. Then would he talk and shout as man would. And when a deal of wine he'd pour within, then he would utter no word save Latin. Some phrases he had learned, say 2 or 3, which he had garnered out of some decree. No wonder, for he'd heard it all the day, and all you know right well, that even a jay can call out Wat as well as can the Pope. But when, for aught else, into him you'd grope, 'twas found he'd spent his whole philosophy just questo quid jure would he cry. And that means questo quid jure, what point of law does this investigation involve? He was a noble rascal and a kind, a better comrade 'twould be hard to find. Why he would suffer for a quart of wine some good fellow to leave his concubine a 12-month and excuse him to the full. Between ourselves, though, he could pluck a gull, and if he chanced upon a good fellow, he would instruct him never to have awe, in such a case, of the archdeacon's curse, except a man's soul lie within his purse. For in his purse the man should punished be. The purse is the archdeacon's hell, said he, but well I know he lied in what he said. A curse ought every guilty man to dread, for curse can kill as absolution save, and war significavit to the grave. And significavit means the writ that transferred someone found guilty in the ecclesiastical court to a civil court to administer punishment. In his own power had he, and at ease, the boys and girls of all the diocese, and knew their secrets, and by counsel led, a garland he had set upon his head, large as a tavern's wine brush on a stake. A buckler had he made of bread they bake. The pardoner. With him there rode a gentle pardoner, of Rounceville his friend and his compeer. Straight from the court of Rome had journeyed he, loudly he sang, Come hither, love, to me. The summoner joining with a burden round, was never horn of half so great a sound. This pardoner had hair as yellow as wax, but lank it hung as does a strike of flax. In wisps hung down such locks as he'd on head, and with them he his shoulders overspread. But thin they dropped and stringy one by one, but as to hood, for sport of it, he'd none. Though it was packed in wallet all the while, it seemed to him he went in latest style. Dishevelled save for cap, his head all bare, as shiny eyes he had as has a hair. He had a fine Veronica sewed to cap, Veronica is a portrait of Christ's face, as it was reported to have been impressed on Saint Veronica's handkerchief. His wallet lay before him in his lap, stuffed full of pardons, bright from Rome, all hot. A voice he had that bleated like a goat, for beard had he, nor ever should he have. For smooth his face, as he'd just had a shave, I think he was a gelding or a mare. But in his craft from Berwick unto Ware was no such pardoner in any place. For in his bag he had a pillowcase, for which he said was our true lady's veil. He said he had a piece of the very sail that good St. Peter had, what time he went upon the sea till Jesus changed his vent. He had a Latin cross set full of stones, and in a bottle he had some pig's bones. But with these relics, when he came upon some simple parson, then this paragon, in that one day more money stood to gain than the poor dupe in 2 months could attain. And thus with flattery and such like japes, he made the parson and the rest his apes. But yet to tell the whole truth at the last, he was in church a fine ecclesiast. Could he read a lesson or a story, but best of all he sang an offertory. For well he knew that when that song was sung, then might he preach and all with polished tongue, to win some silver as he right well could, therefore he sang so merrily and so loud. Now have I told you briefly in a clause the state, the array, the number, and the cause of the assembling of this company in Southwark at this noble hostelry, known as the Tabard Inn, hard by the Bell. But now the time is come wherein to tell how all were bore ourselves that very night, when at the hostelry we did alight, and afterward the story I engage, but tell you of our common pilgrimage, But first I pray you of your courtesy, you'll not ascribe it to vulgarity, though I speak plainly of this matter here, retailing you their words and means of cheer, nor though I use their very terms nor lie, for this thing do you know as well as I, when one repeats a tale told by a man, he must report, as nearly as he can, every least word if he remember it, however rude it be, or how unfit, or else he may be telling what's untrue, embellishing and fictionizing too. He may not spare, although it were his brother, he must as well say one word as another. Christ spoke right broadly out in Holy Writ, and you know well there's nothing low in it. And Plato says to those able to read, the word shall be the cousin to the deed. Also I pray that you'll forgive it me, if I have not set folk in their degree. Here in this tale by rank as they should stand, my wits are not the best, you'll understand. Great cheer our host gave to us every one, and to the supper set us all anon, and served us then with victuals and the best, victuals of the best. Strong was the wine, and pleasant to each guest. A seemly man our good host was withal, fit to have been a marshal in some hall. He was a large man with protruding eyes, as fine a burgher as in Cheapside lies, bold in his speech, and wise, and right well taught, and as to manhood lacking there in naught. He was a very merry man, and after meat at playing he began, speaking of mirth among some other things, when all of us had paid our reckonings. And you're all welcome here, and heartily, for by my truth and telling you no lie, I have not seen this year a company here in this inn fitter for sport than now. Fain would I make you happy, knew I how, and of a game have I this moment thought to give you joy, and it shall cost you naught. You go to Canterbury, may God speed, and the blessed martyr soon requite your meed. So meed is reward. And blessed martyr soon requite your meed. And well I know, as you go on your way, you'll tell good tales, and shape yourselves to play. For truly there's no mirth, no comfort none, riding the roads as dumb as is a stone. And therefore I will furnish you a sport, as I just said, to give you some comfort. And if you like it all by one assent, and will be ruled by mine of my judgment, and will to do as I'll proceed to say, tomorrow when you ride upon your way, then by my father's spirit who is dead, if you're not gay, I'll give you up my head. Hold up your hands, no more about it speak. Our full assenting was not far to seek. We thought there was no reason to think twice, and granted him his way without advice, and bade him tell his verdict just and wise. Masters, quoth he, here now is my advice, but take it not, I pray you, in disdain. This is the point, to put it short and plain, that each of you beguiling the long day shall tell 2 stories as you wend your way to Canterbury town, and each of you on coming home shall tell another 2. All of adventures he has known befall, and he who plays his part the best of all, that is to say, who tells upon the road tales of best sense in most amusing mode, shall have a supper at the other's cost, here in this room and sitting by this post, when we come back again from Canterbury, and now the more to warrant you'll be merry, I will myself and gladly with you ride, at my own cost, and I will be your guide. But whosoever shall my rule gainsay, shall pay for all that bought along the way. And if you are agreed that it be so, tell me at once, or if not, tell me no, and I will act accordingly no more. This thing was granted, and our oaths we swore with right glad hearts, and prayed of him also that he would take the office nor forego the place of governor of all of us, judging our tales, and by his wisdom thus arrange that supper at a certain price, we to be ruled each one by his advice in things both great and small. By one assent we stood committed to his government, and thereupon the wine was fetched anon. We drank, and then to rest we went every one, and that without a longer tarrying. Next morning, when the day began to spring, up rose our host, and acting as our cock, he gathered us together in a flock. And forth we rode, a jog-trot being the pace, until we reached St. Thomas's watering place. And there our host pulled horse up to a walk, and said, Now, masters, listen while I talk. You know that you agreed at set of sun, if evensong and morning song are one. Let's here decide who first shall tell a tale, and as I hope to drink more wine and ale, whoso proves rebel to my government shall pay for all that by the way is spent. Come now, draw cuts before we farther win, and he that draws the shortest shall begin. Sir Knight, said he, my master and my lord, you shall draw first, if you have pledged your word. Come near, quoth he, my lady prioress, and you, sir clerk, put by your bashfulness, nor ponder more, out hands now every man. At once to draw a cut each one began, and to make short the matter as it was, whether by chance or whatsoever cause, the truth is, that the cut fell to the knight, at which right happy then was every wight. Thus that his story first of all he'd tell, according to the compact it befell. And as you have heard, why argue to and fro? And when this good man saw that it was so, being a wise man and obedient to plighted word given by free assent, he said, Since I must then begin the game, why, welcome be the cut, and in God's name. Now let us ride, and hearken what I say. And at that word we rode forth on our way, and he began to speak with right good cheer, his tale anon, as it is written here. Here ends the prologue of this book, and here begins the first tale, which is the Knight's Tale. And actually, I'm not going to read that now. We will read that next. Good night.